Standing in my sustainable fashion boutique on that rainy Seattle morning, watching Alexander Wright fill out employee paperwork, I couldn't help but appreciate life's perfect sense of timing. 2 years ago, he'd stood in his corner office at TechVision, laughing at my resignation letter and calling my dream of sustainable fashion a pathetic waste of talent. Now, the former VP of sales was about to become my lowest-paid retail associate. But before I tell you how the mighty Alex Wright ended up folding recycled clothing in my stockroom, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in second chances, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's story might just change how you think about redemption. I remember that day in his office like it was yesterday. The Seattle skyline stretched behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows, the Space Needle piercing through morning fog as I handed him my resignation letter. I'd spent 5 years climbing the corporate ladder at TechVision, becoming their top-performing marketing strategist. But every morning, as I pulled on another designer suit, I felt like I was wearing someone else's life. "You're leaving to open a what?" Alex's voice dripped with condescension as he read my letter. His Rolex caught the morning light as he leaned, back in his ergonomic chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "A sustainable fashion boutique? Come on, Victoria. You're throwing away a 6-figure salary to sell used clothes?" "It's more than that," I explained, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. "Restyle Revolution isn't just about fashion. It's about changing how people think about sustainability, about making eco-conscious fashion accessible and stylish." Even as I spoke, I could see him dismissing every word. He stood up, straightening his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit. "Let me give you some advice, Victoria. This little project of yours?" He gestured dismissively. "It'll be bankrupt within 6 months. The real world isn't some feel-good fantasy where passion pays the bills. When this fails, and it will fail, don't expect your position here to be waiting for you." I left his office that day with my head held high, but his words echoed in my mind as I poured my life savings into renovating an old warehouse in South Lake Union. The space had potential: high ceilings, exposed brick, massive windows. But it needed work. A lot of work. Every night, as I scrubbed floors and painted walls, I could hear Alex's mocking laughter. Maria Delgado, my former professor from fashion school, was the only one who truly believed in my vision. She'd stop by after her classes, helping me transform discarded clothing into runway-worthy pieces. "Mihija," she'd say, her hands working magic with needle and thread. "People like Alex Wright, they only understand one kind of success. But you see the beauty in transformation." The first few months were brutal. Seattle's tech boom had sent rents soaring, and my carefully planned budget stretched thinner each day. I worked 18-hour days, hunting through estate sales and vintage shops, upcycling everything I could find. My hands grew calloused from sewing, my eyes strained from endless nights of bookkeeping. But slowly, something magical began to happen. Local fashion bloggers discovered us. A small write-up in the Seattle Times turned into a feature in Pacific Northwest magazine. Our upcycled designer pieces caught the attention of eco-conscious tech employees, the same ones who once wore the kind of fast fashion I was now transforming. Each garment told a story. Each piece represented hours of creative resurrection. But it wasn't until Rachel Hammond from Seattle Business Monthly walked in that I realized how far we'd come. She wasn't there for the clothes. She was there to interview me about disrupting the local fashion scene. As we talked, her eyes kept drifting to our wall of before and after photos, showing the journey of each transformed piece. "This is more than a boutique," she said, taking notes. "You're creating a movement." The article was scheduled to run the following week, but the night before publication, my phone exploded with notifications. TechVision, it seemed, was imploding. The company had been inflating sales figures, and their entire executive team was under investigation. At the center of the scandal? Alexander Wright, whose aggressive sales tactics had crossed from unethical into illegal. I stayed up late reading the coverage, my tablet propped against a stack of vintage designer bags waiting to be restored. Alex had apparently been manipulating numbers for years, pressuring his team to create fake accounts and phantom sales. In his pursuit of ever higher numbers, he'd broken not just the law, but the trust of everyone who'd believed in him. The next morning, as I unlocked the boutique's door, I had no idea that my past was about to collide with my present in the most unexpected way. But that's where our story takes its first real turn. And you won't believe what happened next when Alex Wright walked through my door, no longer wearing Tom Ford, but desperately clutching a copy of our Help Wanted sign. The morning Alex Wright walked into Restyle Revolution, Seattle's signature rain drummed against our skylights, creating shadows that danced across our reclaimed wood floors. I was arranging a new window display, carefully positioning a vintage Chanel jacket I'd restored using sustainable materials when I heard the bell above our door chime. The sound of expensive leather shoes squeaking against wet floor made me turn. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit, replaced by department store business casual that hung awkwardly on his frame. His usually immaculate hair showed strands of gray, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. But the biggest change was in his posture. The arrogant tilt of his chin had vanished, replaced by something I'd never seen in Alex Wright: uncertainty. Olivia Parker, my assistant manager, moved protectively to my side. She'd heard all the stories about my former boss, and her hand tightened on the steamer she was holding. I touched her arm gently, signaling that I'd handle this. "Victoria," Alex said, his voice barely carrying across the showroom. "I saw your Help Wanted sign." He held up a crumpled paper, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. The same hands that had dismissively waved away my dreams 2 years ago were now clutching at the possibility of minimum wage work. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the gentle whir of sewing machines from our restoration workshop in the back. Through the open door, I could see Maria teaching our newest apprentice how to properly deconstruct a designer blazer for upcycling. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Alex had been destroying his career, we'd been building something beautiful from what others had discarded. "Why here?" I asked finally, genuinely curious. Surely there were other places. Places where he hadn't once prophesied failure and bankruptcy. Places where the walls weren't lined with physical proof of how wrong he'd been about me. He swallowed hard, looking around at what we'd built. Our space had transformed from that empty warehouse into something magical. Exposed brick walls now, showcased before and after photos of our most dramatic transformations. Vintage clothing racks held carefully curated pieces, each with its own story of resurrection. In the corner, our small cafe served sustainable, locally sourced refreshments to customers who often spent hours exploring and learning about eco-conscious fashion. "Because," he said quietly, "I've lost everything else. My reputation, my savings, my future in tech, the investigation." He trailed off, running a hand through his graying hair. "Nobody else will hire me, but mostly I'm here because I was wrong. What you've built here, it's remarkable. And maybe I need to learn how to build something real too." I studied him carefully, remembering all those nights I'd spent doubting myself because of his words. The weight of his mockery had sat heavy on my shoulders as I'd stretched my savings to the breaking point. As I'd learned to repair vintage sewing machines because we couldn't afford new ones. As I'd pitched our concept to skeptical investors, who'd looked at me exactly the way he had. "The position starts at minimum wage," I said finally. "You'll be expected to learn everything from the ground up, sorting donations, basic repairs, customer service. This isn't a management position, Alex. You'll be starting at the bottom." He nodded, looking almost relieved. "I understand. You'll also need to complete our sustainability training program. Every piece of clothing has value, has potential. We don't waste anything here. That means learning about fabric types, restoration techniques, ethical fashion practices. It's not just about selling, it's about understanding why what we do matters. "I want to learn," he said, and for the first time since he'd walked in, I heard something genuine in his voice. "I need to learn." Behind him, through our front, windows. I could see the gleaming towers of Seattle's tech district where he'd once reigned. Now he stood in my domain, surrounded by the very things he'd once dismissed as worthless. I thought about karma, about justice, about the satisfaction of proving him wrong. But I also thought about Maria's words about transformation, about seeing the potential in things and people others had discarded. "Be here tomorrow at 7 a.m., I said finally. "Wear comfortable shoes and clothes you don't mind getting." Dirty. "We start with sorting donations in the back room." The relief that flooded his face was almost painful to watch. But as he turned to leave, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I called after him. "And Alex, that designer suit you're wearing at home? Bring it in. Let's make it your first lesson in transformation." After he left, Olivia approached me cautiously. "Are you sure about this, Victoria? After everything he said, everything he did?" I walked to our restoration workshop, picking up a damaged Burberry trench coat that had just arrived. The leather trim was cracked, the lining torn, buttons missing. To most people, it was trash, but I could already see what it could become. "When I started this business," I told her, running my fingers over the coat's weathered fabric, "it wasn't just about fashion. It was about proving that everything deserves a second chance if you're willing to put in the work, even the things and people that seem the most damaged." That evening, as I closed up the shop, I found myself standing in our sorting room, where Alex would begin his journey tomorrow. The space was lined with bins labeled by fabric type, condition, and potential. Each piece that came through here had a story of being worn, discarded, and now, possibly, reborn. Tomorrow, Alex Wright would begin writing his own story of transformation, starting from the very bottom of an industry he'd once mocked. I picked up a damaged silk scarf from the designer bin, its Hermes pattern barely visible under years of neglect. Tomorrow, this scarf would be one of Alex's first lessons in seeing potential where others saw only waste. As I turned out the lights, the rain still drumming against our skylights, I wondered if he would recognize the parallel between these discarded garments and his own life, both waiting for the chance to prove their worth again. Daniel Foster, Alex's former colleague, had texted me earlier. "You're crazy to hire him. He'll probably try to take over, try to change everything." But that's where Daniel was wrong. Restyle Revolution wasn't just a business, it was a philosophy. And sometimes, the greatest revolution isn't in proving someone wrong, but in giving them the chance to prove themselves right in an entirely new way. 7 a.m. sharp, and Alex Wright was standing in our sorting room, staring at mountains of donated clothing like a man facing his own mortality. He'd followed my instructions, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt that probably cost more than our daily sales target. His Italian leather watch looked absurdly out of place next to the industrial sorting tables. "First lesson," I said, handing him a pair of work gloves. "Every piece tells a story. Your job is to listen." I pulled out a damaged Valentino gown from the newest donation pile. The beadwork was falling apart, the silk torn at the seams. "What do you see?" "Garbage," he answered automatically, then caught himself. "I mean, it's ruined. The repairs would cost more than the dress is worth." Maria, who had been quietly organizing her workstation, looked up sharply. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that filled our landfills with 11 million tons of textile waste last year," she said, her accent thickening with emotion. "Come here." She led us to her restoration table, where she'd been working on a similar gown. Under her skilled hands, The damaged dress had been transformed into a stunning cocktail jacket, its salvaged beadwork creating an intricate pattern along the collar. Value isn't just about money, Mr. Wright. It's about vision, about seeing possibilities where others see waste. The morning progressed with Alex learning our sorting system. Every garment had to be evaluated, categorized, and routed to the appropriate station. Designer pieces went to our high-end restoration team. Vintage items were assessed for historical significance. Even badly damaged clothes had potential. We partnered with local artists who used the fabrics for everything from quilts to art installations. Around noon, Rachel Hammond from Seattle Business Monthly stopped by for a follow-up interview. Her eyes widened when she saw Alex Wright, former tech executive, carefully sorting through a bin of damaged sweaters. I saw her reach for her phone, no doubt eager to add this juicy detail to her story. "Rachel," I called out, moving between her and Alex. "Let's talk in my office." As I led her away, I caught Alex's grateful glance. He might be here as my lowest paid employee, but I wouldn't let his redemption become a media circus. "You know who that is," Rachel said as soon as my office door closed. "Alex Wright's fall from grace is still front-page news. Having him working here, after everything, that's a story people would love to read." I shook my head, touching a framed photo on my wall. It showed our first team photo, taken the day we opened. Restyle Revolution isn't about revenge or public humiliation. It's about transformation. Everyone deserves the chance to rebuild. When I returned to the sorting room, Alex was struggling with a pile of vintage Levi's jeans. "These are all damaged," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "The knees are torn. The hems are frayed. How can we possibly sell these?" Olivia stepped in, her expertise in denim restoration showing as she quickly assessed the pile. Torn. Knees become cut-off shorts for summer. Frayed hems get repurposed into laptop cases. The really damaged ones? We work with a local paper artist who turns denim fibers into handmade journals. She handed him a finished journal, its cover a beautiful swirl of indigo fibers. Nothing is worthless if you know how to transform it. By late afternoon, Alex's designer clothes were covered in dust, his hands rough from handling hundreds of garments. I watched him tackle each task with a determination I'd never seen during his corporate days. When a customer asked him about a vintage handbag's history, he admitted his ignorance but eagerly absorbed Olivia's detailed explanation of the piece's provenance and restoration process. The real test came when a young woman brought in a badly damaged designer suit. "It was my mother's," she explained, tears in her eyes. She wore it to every important meeting when she was building her company. But now, she held up the jacket, its seams split, its lining shredded. I saw something shift in Alex's expression as he looked at the suit. Perhaps he recognized the same brand he used to wear. Or maybe he finally understood that clothes could be more than just status, symbols. "We can help," he said quietly, surprising all of us. "Victoria and Maria. They know how to preserve memories, not just fabric." That evening, after we'd closed, I found Alex still at his sorting table, carefully organizing a pile of silk scarves by damage type and restoration potential. His expensive watch lay forgotten in his locker, replaced by the practical digital timer we used to track restoration projects. "You didn't have to defend me," he said without looking up. "With the reporter. You could have let her run the story, shown everyone how far I've fallen." I picked up one of the scarves, a Hermes piece similar to the one I'd held yesterday. Its pattern was barely visible under years of wear, but the silk still held its essential strength. "This business isn't about falling or rising," I told him. "It's about understanding that everything and everyone has value beyond their current condition." He finally looked up, his hands stained with fabric dye and sorting markers. "I spent 15 years in tech, pushing people to buy things they didn't need, measuring success in quarterly profits. One day here has taught me more about real value than my entire career. As we locked up for the night, Maria pulled me aside. He has potential, she said thoughtfully. Like that Valentino gown, damaged but not destroyed. The real question is, does he have the patience to learn how to rebuild himself? Walking home through Seattle's evening drizzle, I thought about transformation, not just of clothes or careers, but of perspectives. Alex Wright, who once measured worth solely in dollars, had spent a day learning to find value in what others had discarded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of his commitment to change. But for now, watching him carefully lock up his sorting station, treating damaged garments with the same respect he once reserved for corporate contracts, I saw a glimmer of what Maria had seen, the possibility of transformation. The first major challenge came exactly 2 weeks into Alex's employment at Restyle Revolution. A sleek Tesla pulled up outside our storefront, and out stepped Timothy Nash, TechVision's new CEO. I watched through our restored Victorian windows as he straightened his tie, the same power move I'd seen Alex perform countless times in his previous life. Maria tensed beside me at her workstation, her hands stilling on the vintage Dior she was carefully deconstructing. "Trouble," she murmured, setting down her seam ripper. In the back room, Alex was conducting his first solo inventory assessment, completely unaware of his former colleague's arrival. The bell chimed as Nash entered, bringing with him the sharp scent of expensive cologne that seemed suddenly out of place among our natural dyes and restored fabrics. His eyes swept our space dismissively before landing on me. "Ms. Chen," he said, not bothering to hide his disdain. "A word." I led him to our consultation area, a cozy corner furnished with restored mid-century pieces. He perched uncomfortably on an Eames chair we'd rescued and reupholstered with sustainable fabric. "I'll be direct," he said, pulling out his phone. "We know Alex Wright is working here. What's your angle?" "Excuse me?" He showed me his screen, a series of text messages between Alex and other former TechVision executives. "He's been reaching out to his old contacts, asking questions about our past projects. If you're helping him gather information for some kind of exposé or lawsuit." Before I could respond, we heard a crash from the sorting room. A box of designer handbags awaiting restoration had toppled, spilling across the floor. Alex emerged, dusty and apologetic, freezing when he saw Nash. "Tim," he said quietly, straightening up. Designer bags worth thousands in their original condition lay scattered around his feet like fallen leaves. Nash stood, his polished appearance a stark contrast to Alex's work-worn state. "This is what you've been reduced to? Digging through garbage?" I watched Alex's hands clench, saw the flash of humiliation cross his face. But then something remarkable happened. He knelt down and began carefully gathering the bags, checking each one for additional damage from the fall. "Not garbage," he said, his voice steady. "Heritage pieces waiting for restoration. Each one has a story, a future." "Stories don't pay bills," Nash scoffed. "You had everything, Alex. Corner office, stock options, influence. Now you're what? A glorified thrift store clerk?" I stepped forward, but Alex raised a hand, still focused on the bags. "You know what I realized, Tim? In 15 years at TechVision, I never created anything real. I manipulated numbers, pushed products people didn't need, chased profits at any cost. Here?" He held up a damaged Gucci bamboo handlebag from the 1960s. "Here I'm learning to preserve history, to see value beyond a price tag, to actually make something better." Nash's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at Alex. "The SEC investigation is expanding. They're looking at projects from before your time. If you have any information—" "I don't," Alex interrupted, placing the last bag carefully in its bin. "And even if I did, I wouldn't share it. I'm not looking for revenge or immunity. I'm looking for redemption." After Nash left, the store felt different, as if the air itself had shifted. Olivia emerged from behind a rack of restored evening wear where she'd been pretending to organize. "You okay?" she asked Alex. He nodded, then pulled out a small notebook, the handmade denim one we'd shown him his first day. "Actually, can you teach me more about this bag's history?" he asked, gesturing to the Gucci piece. "If I'm going to help?" "Restore it? I should understand its story." That evening, as we were closing up, Maria called us all to her workstation. She'd finished transforming the vintage Dior, not into another dress, but into an elegant series of accessories. A clutch made from the bodice, hair accessories from the beading, even a delicate jewelry roll crafted from the silk lining. "Sometimes," she said, looking pointedly at Alex, "the greatest transformations happen when we stop trying to be what we were and embrace what we could become." Later, I found Alex in the break room, staring at his reflection in our upcycled mirror mosaic. Each piece rescued from damaged antique mirrors, now forming something new and beautiful. "Nash was right about one thing," he said. "I have been reaching out to old contacts." My heart sank, remembering Nash's accusations. But Alex continued, "Not for revenge. There's a network of corporate clothing donation programs I helped set up years ago. Professional wear for job seekers, suits for interviews. Most of it ends up in landfills because of minor damage. I thought maybe..." "You want to create a corporate partnership program," I finished, understanding dawning. "Use your old connections to intercept those clothes before they're discarded." He nodded eagerly. "We could offer restoration services, teaching programs. Most of these companies write off the donations anyway. But with our skills, we could actually create a sustainable cycle. Give people not just clothes, but skills, opportunities." I studied him carefully. 2 weeks ago, he'd walked through our door a broken man. Now he was thinking about expansion, about using his past connections for transformation rather than profit. But more than that, he was thinking about impact. Real, tangible change in an industry he'd once dismissed. "Draft a proposal," I said finally. "But remember, this isn't TechVision. We measure success in lives changed, not just profits made." That night, as I updated our business journal, I found myself thinking about transformation. Not just of clothes or careers, but of perspectives. Alex Wright, who once measured worth by stock prices and profit margins, was now seeing value in what others discarded, both in our inventory and in himself. Maria's voice echoed in my head. "Sometimes the strongest materials are the ones that have been tested, broken, and carefully restored." Looking at the scattered papers on my desk, Alex's rough notes about corporate partnerships mixing with restoration techniques and sustainability guidelines, I wondered if the same might be true of people. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Nash's visit had made that clear. But watching Alex today, defending not just his work but our entire mission, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine transformation. The question was, as the pressure mounted and his past continued to resurface, would this change prove as durable as our restored vintage pieces? Or would it unravel like a poorly mended seam? Seattle's first autumn storm rattled our workshop windows as I reviewed Alex's corporate partnership proposal. Rain drummed against the skylights while Maria guided a group of fashion design students through their first restoration workshop. Over the past month, word had spread about our unique apprenticeship program, attracting everyone from design students to corporate refugees seeking a more meaningful path. The proposal in front of me wasn't just thorough, it was revolutionary. Alex had mapped out connections with 20 major Seattle companies, including his former rivals at TechVision, creating a network that would redirect corporate fashion waste into our restoration program. But it was the second phase that truly captured our mission, a training program teaching sustainable fashion skills to job seekers. Olivia entered with our morning coffee, locally sourced and served in rescued vintage cups. "The morning news," she said, placing a tablet beside me. The headline made my heart skip. TechVision scandal deepens. New evidence suggests widespread corporate corruption. "They're saying Nash knew everything," Olivia continued quietly. "The SEC investigation found emails proving he was involved in the same practices he accused Alex of. Through the workshop windows, I could see Alex teaching a young apprentice how to properly assess vintage leather goods. His designer suits now hung forgotten in our textile library, cataloged as teaching examples of fast fashion's impact. The man who once chased quarterly profits was earnestly explaining the historical significance of a worn Hermes Kelly bag to a fascinated student. The workshop door chimed, and in walked Claire Bennett, fashion editor of Northwest Style magazine. Her presence in our studio wasn't unusual anymore. She'd become a regular since discovering our sustainable luxury collection. But today, her expression carried a different weight. "Victoria," she said, air kissing my cheeks. "You've been holding out on me. Why didn't you tell me Alex Wright was working here?" Her eyes sparkled with journalistic interest. "The man who orchestrated TechVision's aggressive expansion, now sorting vintage clothing? That's a story my readers would devour." I led her to our consultation area, noting how her designer heels clicked against our reclaimed wood floors. "Alex isn't a story, Claire. He's an employee learning our craft, just like anyone else." "Oh, darling," she laughed, pulling out her phone. "He's much more than that now. Have you seen the latest? Nash has been arrested. The FBI raided TechVision this morning. They're saying Alex's original records might have been right. Nash was the one manipulating everything, setting Alex up to take the fall." My heart raced as I processed this information. In the workshop, Alex remained focused on his lesson, unaware that his world was shifting again. Claire watched him through the glass, her reporter's instincts clearly sensing a story. "The real question," she continued, "is why someone like Alex Wright, who could now potentially clear his name and return to corporate life, chooses to stay here, making minimum wage in a sustainable fashion studio." Before I could respond, Maria appeared with a stack of newly restored vintage pieces. "Perhaps," she said, her accent adding weight to her words, "because some people learn that true wealth isn't in a bank account, but in creating something meaningful." Claire's eyes widened as she took in the transformed garments. What had been a pile of damaged designer clothes was now a stunning collection of unique pieces, each telling its own story of resurrection. "These are extraordinary," she breathed, touching a jacket crafted from 3 different vintage Chanel suits. "Who designed these?" "Alex did," Maria said proudly. "The patterns, the combinations, all his work. He has an eye for seeing how broken pieces can fit together in new ways." I watched Claire's journalistic focus shift visibly. The story she'd come for, about a disgraced executive's fall from grace, was transforming before her eyes into something else entirely. Just then, Alex emerged from his lesson, a restored leather journal in his hands. "Ms. Bennett," he said, recognizing her instantly. "I wondered when you'd come to write about my downfall." His voice carried no bitterness, only a calm acceptance that surprised us all. Claire studied him, noting his work-worn hands and the measuring tape around his neck. "Actually," she said slowly, "I think I'm here to write about your renaissance. Would you show me what you're working on?" For the next hour, Alex guided Claire through our restoration process, explaining how each damaged piece offered unique opportunities for transformation. He showed her our textile library, where we cataloged every scrap of fabric for future use. His eyes lit up as he demonstrated how a torn vintage scarf could become elegant dress trim, or how damaged designer suits could be reimagined into contemporary pieces while preserving their heritage. "The real waste in fashion isn't just in discarded clothes," he explained, showing her a jacket he'd designed using salvaged pieces from 5 different vintage suits. "It's in discarded potential. Every piece has a story, and every story deserves a chance to continue. Claire was no longer taking notes, completely absorbed in Alex's passionate explanation of sustainable luxury. When she finally left, clutching a stack of business cards and restoration care guides, I knew tomorrow's story would be very different from the one she'd come to write. That evening, as the storm continued to rage outside, I found Alex in our pattern room, carefully piecing together a new design. "Nash has been arrested," I said quietly. "The FBI found evidence clearing you of the major charges." He nodded, not looking up from his work. "I know. Daniel texted me." "You could go back," I said, voicing the fear I'd been holding since hearing the news. "Clear your name, restart your corporate career. No one would blame you." Finally, he looked up, and I saw in his eyes something I'd never seen during his corporate days: peace. "Why would I go back?" he asked, gesturing to the workshop around us. "There, I destroyed value. Here, I create it. There, I measured success in dollars. Here, I measure it in transformations, both of clothes and people." He picked up a damaged vintage purse from his workstation. "See this Gucci? When it came in, everyone except Maria said it was beyond saving. But she taught me to look deeper, to see the potential beneath the damage. That's what this place did, for me. You and Maria, you saw something worth saving when everyone else saw someone beyond redemption." The storm outside was beginning to ease, much like the turmoil that had surrounded Alex these past months. As I watched him return to his work, meticulously planning how to transform damaged designer pieces into something new and beautiful, I realized Claire had been asking the wrong question. The story wasn't about why Alex stayed in a minimum wage job when he could return to his corporate life. The real story was about how a man who once measured everything in profit and loss had learned to see value in what others discarded, including himself. Tomorrow, the news would break about Nash's arrest and Alex's potential vindication. But the real headline would be written in the quiet moments of transformation that happened every day in our workshop, where broken things and broken people found new purpose, new value, and new life. The first real test of Alex's transformation came on a crisp November morning when Grace Montgomery swept into Restyle Revolution. The click of her Louboutins against our reclaimed wood floors announced her presence before the bell even chimed. As TechVision's former head of legal, she'd been Alex's closest ally during his corporate days. Now, she carried a sleek briefcase and an agenda I could read in her sharp smile. I was helping a young designer understand the intricacies of repurposing. Vintage Hermes scarves when Grace's perfume cut through our workshop's natural sense of leather and laundered silk. Alex looked up from where he was teaching an apprentice about sustainable leather restoration, his hands stained with natural dyes. "Grace," he said, carefully setting down a partially restored wallet. "This is unexpected." She surveyed our workshop with the same expression she'd once used to evaluate corporate acquisitions. "Alex, darling, we need to talk. Privately." Her eyes flicked dismissively over his workstation, the carefully organized restoration tools, the half-finished projects that represented hours of patient craftsmanship. Maria emerged from our textile library, arms full of rescued designer fabrics. She took one look at Grace and muttered something in Spanish that made our bilingual apprentices hide their smiles. "The consultation room is occupied with a restoration consultation," she said firmly. "You'll have to talk here." Grace's perfectly painted lips tightened, but she had no choice. Setting her briefcase on a clean section of workbench, she pulled out a thick folder. "The SEC investigation has cleared you completely. Nash's arrest has opened up everything. The board wants you back, Alex. Not just back. They're offering you the CEO position." The apprentices pretended not to listen, but their hands stilled on their projects. Olivia moved closer to my side, her loyalty evident in her protective stance. But I kept my focus on Alex, watching his reaction. "They're offering full reinstatement," Grace continued, warming to her pitch. plus compensation for wrongful termination, stock options, and a signing bonus that would make your current annual salary look like pocket change. She glanced around. Our workshop. No more sorting through other people's cast-offs. You can come back to where you belong. Alex wiped his hands on his apron, the same apron where he'd proudly sewn his first properly executed buttonhole last week. He picked up the wallet he'd been restoring, turning it carefully in the light. "See this piece?" he said quietly. "It's a 1960s Gucci. Most people would say it's beyond saving. The leather's cracked, the stitching's gone, the hardware's tarnished. But look closer." He held it out to Grace, who took it reflexively, then tried not to grimace at the natural dyes now staining her manicure. Under the damage, the leather's still strong. The design is timeless. With the right techniques, patience, and vision, it can be more than restored. It can be transformed. That's what we do here, Grace. We don't just fix things. We give them new life, new purpose. Grace set the wallet down like it might bite her. Very poetic. But this isn't about wallets. The tech industry is watching. Your vindication is business, news. The story of your return would be worth millions in PR alone. And what story would that be? Alex asked, returning to his workstation. The prodigal executive returns to the system that nearly destroyed him? The vindicated victim takes control of his former persecutors? He picked up his tools again. I'm already living a better story here. Grace's composure cracked slightly. Alex, be reasonable. You're working for minimum wage in a thrift store. Your expertise is in corporate strategy, not fixing old handbags. Actually, Olivia interjected, unable to stay quiet, he's developed 3 new restoration techniques that have revolutionized how we handle vintage leather goods. And our corporate partnership program, his idea by the way, has already diverted 30 tons of textile waste from landfills. And those old handbags? Maria added, setting down her fabric pile. The ones you dismiss so easily? The restoration skills we teach here have helped 50 people start their own sustainable fashion businesses this year alone. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but just then the consultation room door opened. Out stepped Jasmine Lee, one of Seattle's most prominent tech entrepreneurs, clutching a restored vintage Chanel suit. "This is extraordinary," she exclaimed, then noticed Grace. "Oh, Ms. Montgomery, hear about the TechVision situation?" Grace straightened, slipping instantly into corporate mode. "Ms. Lee, I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I'm here every week now," Jasmine said, smoothing her hand over the restored suit. "Alex has been helping us develop a sustainable fashion program for our corporate offices. Did you know the tech industry sends millions of dollars worth of slightly damaged clothing to landfills every year? The waste is staggering. But with Restyle's restoration training program, we're changing that. One garment, one person at a time." I watched Grace process this information, saw her reassess the workshop with new eyes. Suddenly, our carefully organized restoration stations looked less like a thrift store and more like an innovation lab. The apprentices bent over their work weren't just sorting through old clothes. They were learning transformative skills that combined craftsmanship with sustainability. "The board meeting is tomorrow morning," Grace said finally, gathering her papers. "They're expecting your answer." Alex nodded, already turning back to his apprentice and their leather restoration project. "Tell them thank you, but I'm exactly where I need to be. My expertise isn't in corporate strategy anymore, Grace. It's in seeing the value in things and people that others have discarded." After Grace left, her expensive perfume lingering in our natural workspace, Maria brought out a special project she'd been saving. A vintage Hermes Kelly bag, considered beyond repair by 3 other restoration experts. "Ready to prove her wrong?" she asked Alex, eyes twinkling. That evening, as Seattle's early darkness fell and the workshop lights cast warm shadows on our exposed brick walls, I found Alex still at his station. The Kelly bag was carefully disassembled before him, each piece meticulously cleaned and prepared for restoration. "The CEO position," I said quietly. "That's quite an offer to turn down." He looked up, and in the gentle workshop lighting, I saw not the broken man who had first walked through our door, but someone who had found his true purpose. "You know what I realized?" he said, carefully aligning a piece of vintage leather. "At TechVision, I spent years chasing success. Here, I found something better. I found meaning." The wallet Grace had dismissed sat nearby, its restoration nearly complete. Like Alex himself, it had been transformed, not just repaired. As the last light faded outside our windows, I watched him return to his work, his hands steady, his purpose clear. In choosing to stay, he had proved something profound: that true wealth isn't measured in stock options or corporate titles, but in the ability to create value where others see only waste. Seattle's winter light filtered through our workshop windows, casting long shadows across the vintage cutting tables as I opened an unexpected delivery. Inside, carefully wrapped in acid-free tissue paper, lay an archive of designer pieces from the 1950s: Dior, Balenciaga, Chanel, all in various states of elegant decay. The note attached made my heart skip. "Found these in my grandmother's attic. Heard you work miracles. Timothy Nash." Olivia read the note over my shoulder, her breath catching at the signature. "Nash? As in former TechVision CEO Nash? The one who's awaiting trial?" Maria approached, her expert hands already assessing the treasures before us. Her fingers traced the handwork on a damaged Balenciaga evening coat, her eyes lighting up at the construction details visible beneath years of neglect. "These aren't just vintage pieces," she murmured. "These are museum-quality artifacts." Alex emerged from our new training room, where he'd been teaching a workshop on sustainable leather restoration to a group of fashion design students. The sight of Nash's name made him pause, but his attention quickly shifted to the garments themselves. He'd come so far from the man who once dismissed fashion as frivolous. Now his hands moved with practiced care as he examined the delicate beadwork on a Chanel cocktail dress. His grandmother, Alex said quietly, was Elizabeth Nash. She was one of Seattle's earliest fashion importers. These pieces, they're part of the city's fashion history. The morning's apprentices gathered around, drawn by the excitement. Among them was Lauren Taylor, a former corporate lawyer who'd left her practice to learn sustainable fashion restoration. "Could this be a trap?" she asked, her legal training showing. "Nash sending these now, with his trial approaching?" I carefully lifted a Dior New Look suit from the collection, its wool still perfect despite decades of storage. "Maybe," I admitted, "or maybe it's something else entirely." Just then, our workshop door chimed. A small, elegant woman entered, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. "I see Timothy finally delivered them," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of old Seattle money. "I'm Elizabeth Nash. Those are my treasures you're holding." The workshop fell silent. Elizabeth Nash moved through our space with the grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the presence of beautiful things. She paused at our restoration station, where Alex's latest project, a vintage Hermes Kelly bag, was undergoing revival. "Ah," she said, examining the work. "Horn toggle closure, 1956. You're using traditional techniques." She looked at Alex with sharp eyes. "You've learned well." Alex straightened from his workbench. "Mrs. Nash, I didn't expect to see the grandmother of the man who helped destroy your career?" She smiled slightly. "Timothy may have lost his way, but I've been watching this place, watching you." She turned to survey our workshop. "All of you." Elizabeth moved to the archive pieces we'd just unpacked. "These were my life's collection. I started importing French fashion to Seattle in 1952, when this was still a lumber town. Everyone said luxury had no place here." She touched the Balenciaga coat gently. But I believed beautiful things could transform more than just appearances. Why send them here? I asked, genuinely curious. These pieces belonged in a museum, not a restoration workshop. Because museums preserve, but they don't transform. What you do here, taking damaged things and giving them new life, new purpose, that's what fashion should be about. She faced Alex directly. Timothy told me how you refused the CEO position, said you'd found something more meaningful than corporate power. The workshop hummed with quiet energy as our apprentices continued their work, each restoration project a testament to the truth of her words. At one station, a young designer was turning a damaged vintage suit into a contemporary piece that would sell in our boutique. At another, a former tech worker carefully restored beadwork on an evening gown, his coding skills translating surprisingly well to the precise work. I have a proposition, Elizabeth continued. These pieces, they're not just fashion. They're history, art, craftsmanship. I want you to restore them, yes. But more than that, I want you to use them to teach, to show others what's possible when you combine heritage with innovation. Maria stepped forward, her restoration expertise evident in how she handled the delicate fabrics. You want us to create a teaching collection? Elizabeth nodded. A living archive, not locked away in museum cases but actively used to teach. Sustainable restoration techniques. These pieces can show a new generation how things were made to last, how they can be renewed rather than discarded. I watched Alex as he processed this, saw him understanding the deeper significance. These weren't just valuable vintage pieces, they were tools for transformation, both of garments and people. There's more, Elizabeth added. Timothy's trial starts next month. He's facing serious charges. But watching this place, seeing how you've turned second chances into something beautiful? She paused, collecting herself. Would you consider having him do his community service here? The request hung in the air like suspended thread, delicate but strong. Alex, who had every reason to refuse, was the first to speak. When I came here, he said, handling a damaged Dior collar with practiced care, I thought I'd lost everything. But Victoria and Maria showed me that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding something better. He looked at Elizabeth. If he's willing to learn, really learn, we'll teach him. Lauren spoke up from her workstation. We could develop a specific program. Use these archive pieces to teach not just restoration techniques, but business ethics through sustainable fashion principles. Elizabeth's eyes glistened. Timothy said you'd changed, she told Alex. Said this place had transformed you. Now, I see he wasn't exaggerating. That evening, after our apprentices had gone and the workshop settled into its nighttime quiet, I found Alex and Maria carefully cataloging the Nash archive. Each piece had a story, not just of its original creation, but of the woman who had brought European fashion to a frontier city, believing in beauty's power to transform. Elizabeth Nash saw something in Seattle that others missed, Alex said, photographing construction details for our teaching files. Just like you saw something in me that others had written off. Maria smiled, pinning a delicate sleeve in preparation for restoration. In my country, we have a saying, Las cosas más bellas están rotas. The most beautiful things are broken. It's in the mending that we find true beauty. Through our workshop windows, Seattle's lights sparkled against the winter darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, teaching former corporate executives about sustainable fashion, transforming damaged treasures into tools for learning, building bridges between past and future. But tonight, watching Alex carefully document each piece of fashion history, I saw something profound. True transformation isn't about erasing the past, but about weaving it into something new and meaningful. Morning light streamed through Restyle Revolution's windows as I stared at the email on my screen. The New York Fashion Week Committee wanted us to showcase our sustainable restoration techniques during their upcoming sustainability panel. It wasn't just an invitation. It was validation of everything we'd built. My finger hovered over the accept button when urgent voices from the workshop floor caught my attention. Timothy Nash, dressed in the simple black uniform of our apprentices, stood in our sorting area, facing a group of angry protesters. Their signs condemned corporate greed and environmental destruction, while smartphone cameras captured every moment. Behind them, local news crews gathered like vultures, drawn by the scent of controversy. "This is a publicity stunt," one protester shouted, her voice sharp in our usually peaceful space. TechVision destroyed small businesses, and now their corrupt CEO is pretending to care about sustainability? Alex emerged from the restoration room, his hands stained with natural dyes. The sight of his former boss in our apprentice uniform stopped him short. Maria stepped forward, her protective instincts kicking in, but Timothy raised his hand. "You're right," he said, his voice carrying across the workshop. "I did destroy businesses. I chased profits at any cost. I lost my way." He gestured to the sorting station before him. "That's why I'm here. Not for publicity, but for penance." Lauren, our former corporate lawyer turned apprentice, moved to stand beside him. "I worked cases like TechVision's," she told the protesters. "But here, we're learning something different. Something real." The protest leader, a young environmental activist named Jade Chen, stepped forward. "Prove it," she challenged. "Show us this isn't just corporate greenwashing." Maria exchanged glances with me, then nodded. "Come," she said to Jade. "Let me show you what transformation really looks like." For the next hour, we opened our workshop to the protesters and media. They watched as Timothy learned to sort damaged designer pieces, documenting each item's potential for restoration. Alex demonstrated our natural dyeing techniques, explaining how we'd eliminated toxic chemicals from our processes. Lauren showed them our community impact reports, the jobs created, the textiles diverted from landfills, the lives changed through our training programs. "This isn't about redemption through publicity," I explained to a reporter. "It's about genuine transformation through meaningful work. Every person here, whether they're a former CEO or a career changer, learns the same fundamental truth. Everything has value if you're willing to see it." As the morning progressed, something remarkable happened. The protesters set down their signs, drawn into demonstrations of sustainable fashion techniques. Jade found herself beside Timothy at the sorting station, both of them learning to identify recyclable elements in damaged designer pieces. "These buttons," Timothy said, holding up a vintage Burberry coat. "They're made of natural materials. Horn, mother of pearl. We can salvage them, teach others how to reuse them sustainably?" Jade examined the buttons carefully. "The craftsmanship is incredible," she admitted. "But how do you scale this? How does saving one coat at a time compete with fast fashion?" "It starts with education," Alex interjected, joining them. "Every person who learns these techniques becomes a teacher. Every restored garment becomes a lesson in sustainability. It's slow, yes, but it's lasting change." The workshop buzzed with energy as protesters and apprentices worked side by side. A former TechVision executive taught a young activist about vintage fabric assessment. An environmental science student discussed natural dye techniques with our Iowa master restorer. Barriers broke down over shared work, shared purpose. "This isn't what I expected," Jade admitted later, watching Timothy carefully clean decades of tarnish from vintage buttons. "I thought this was just another corporate performance." "So did I once," Alex said, showing her how to properly document restoration processes. "But Victoria and Maria built something different here, something real." As the day wound down, the media crews packed up their cameras, but several protesters stayed, filling out applications for our training program. Timothy worked steadily at his station, the humility in his posture genuine. The man who once commanded a corporate empire was now focused entirely on salvaging vintage buttons, finding value in what others would discard. The New York Fashion Week email still waited for my response. But watching our workshop transform from a site of protest to a space of collaboration, I realized we were already creating something more valuable than any Fashion Week appearance. Lauren approached my office, excitement in her eyes. The environmental law firm I used to work for called. They want to partner with us, create a program teaching sustainable business practices through fashion restoration. They saw today's coverage. Transformation spreads, Maria said softly, joining us. She handed me a piece of fabric, a silk scarf Timothy had sorted earlier. Under the damage, the pattern was exquisite, waiting to be revealed through careful restoration. Like this pattern, no? Hidden but not lost. That evening, after the protesters and press had gone, our workshop settled into its usual rhythm. Timothy stayed late, meticulously finishing his button restoration project. Alex worked beside him, offering quiet guidance when needed. The former, predator and prey, now teacher and student, bound by shared purpose. I understand now, Timothy said suddenly, holding up a perfectly restored mother-of-pearl button. What my grandmother saw in fashion. It's not about the surface. It's about what lies beneath, what can be saved. Through our windows, Seattle's lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for transformation. The New York Fashion Week invitation wasn't just about showcasing our techniques. It was about spreading our message of sustainable change. Watching Timothy and Alex work together, their corporate rivalry transformed into shared purpose. I realized we'd built something more powerful than any fashion empire. We'd created a space where transformation wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Where the value of things and people wasn't determined by their current state, but by their potential for renewal. Maria summed it up best, holding up the silk scarf Timothy had sorted. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from the most unexpected places. No? Like flowers growing through concrete. They remind us that growth is always possible if we only provide the right conditions. Frost etched delicate patterns on Restyle Revolution's windows as I reviewed the contract from Luminous Luxury Group. The international fashion conglomerate wanted to acquire our sustainable restoration techniques, promising to implement them across their global network of luxury brands. The offer was staggering. Enough money to expand our workshop tenfold, to bring our methods to every major fashion capital. Maria stood at my desk, her expression troubled as she read the terms. They want our methods, but not our mission, she said softly, pointing to a clause buried in the legal language. Under the proposed agreement, our techniques would be reserved exclusively for luxury goods, our training programs limited to high-end retail staff. Alex looked up from the vintage Fendi bag he was restoring, his expertise now evident in every careful stitch. That would mean ending our community programs, he said, glancing at the full workshop floor where Timothy Nash worked alongside former tech workers, environmental activists, and aspiring designers. A movement by the door caught my attention. Kenneth Wong, Luminous Luxury's CEO, entered our space with the confident stride of someone used to getting his way. His bespoke suit seemed almost jarring among our workstations and sustainable materials. "Victoria," he called out, ignoring the curious glances from our apprentices. "Have you considered our offer? $20 million is just the beginning. Your methods could revolutionize luxury fashion restoration worldwide." Before I could respond, the workshop door chimed again. Jade Chen entered, leading a group of students from her environmental science program. They were here for their weekly sustainable fashion workshop, part of our growing education initiative. Kenneth watched as Timothy guided the students through our sorting process, teaching them to identify recyclable elements in damaged clothing. "This is charming," he said, his tone making the word an insult. But imagine these techniques applied to the finest vintage collections in Paris, Milan, New York. Why waste time on community programs when you could be transforming the luxury market? Lauren, overhearing from her workstation, set down the vintage Chanel jacket she was cataloging. "These community programs are transforming lives," she said firmly. "Last month, 3 of our graduates started their own sustainable fashion businesses. 2 more are teaching these techniques in underserved communities." "And those businesses will fail," Kenneth replied bluntly. "The real money, the real impact, is in luxury markets. Your current model is unsustainable." Alex stepped forward, his posture reminding me of his corporate days, but his words carrying new wisdom. "I used to think like you," he said quietly. "That success could only be measured in profit margins. But look around this room." We all turned to survey the workshop floor. At one station, a former homeless youth taught a retired executive about sustainable leather care. At another, Jade's environmental science students learned color matching techniques from Timothy. Every workbench told a story of transformation, of barriers broken down through shared purpose. "This isn't just about restoring clothes," Alex D. continued. "It's about restoring connections, communities, hope. You're offering to scale our techniques, but you'd shrink our impact." Kenneth's expression hardened. "The board meets next week. They're prepared to double the offer, but only if you agree to exclusive luxury market focus. No more community programs, no more public workshops." He glanced dismissively at our apprentices. "No more charity cases." Maria muttered something sharp in Spanish, but I held up my hand. Through the workshop windows, I could see snow beginning to fall, each flake unique yet part of a greater whole, just like our community. "Mr. Wong," I said carefully, "let me show you something." I led him to our heritage wall, where we displayed photographs of our most meaningful transformations, not just of clothing, but of people. "This is James," I said, pointing to a picture of a former tech executive teaching sustainable techniques to high school students. "And here's Sarah, who used our training to start a restoration program in her tribal community." "Touching," Kenneth said impatiently. "But sentiment doesn't scale. Your techniques could transform the luxury restoration market worldwide. Why limit yourself to small impact projects?" Just then, Timothy approached with one of his restored pieces, a vintage Hermes scarf he'd transformed into a stunning modern garment. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the sustainability principles evident in every detail. "When I ran TechVision," Timothy said, handling his creation with careful pride, "I thought scale was everything. More sales, more growth, more profit. But here, I've learned that real transformation happens one person at a time, one piece at a time. It's slower, yes, but it's deeper. It lasts." Kenneth examined the garment with obvious expertise. "This is museum quality work," he admitted. "Imagine doing this for the finest vintage collections in the world." "We already are," Maria interjected. "But we're also teaching others to do it. Every person who learns these techniques becomes a teacher. Every restored garment becomes a lesson in sustainability. The impact multiplies, but not through corporate acquisition, through shared knowledge, shared purpose." The snow fell heavier outside, transforming Seattle's industrial landscape into something magical. Kenneth watched as Jade's students gathered around Timothy, their excitement palpable as he demonstrated an innovative recycling technique. "Your current model will never reach global scale," Kenneth said, but I heard a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Maybe not," I agreed, "but it will reach the right people. The ones who will take these techniques back to their communities, start their own sustainable businesses, teach others what they've learned here." Lauren joined us, carrying the contract. "We could modify these terms," she suggested, her legal background showing. Create a partnership that preserves our community programs while expanding into luxury markets. Kenneth shook his head. The board wants exclusive rights, complete control. This isn't a negotiation. I watched as Alex helped a student understand the complexity of vintage button restoration, his patient teaching a far cry from his former corporate persona. Timothy worked nearby, completely absorbed in showing another group how to properly assess damaged designer pieces. Then we'll have to decline, I said finally. What we've built here isn't just about techniques or profits. It's about proving that true luxury isn't in exclusivity. It's in accessibility. In teaching others to see value where others see waste. Kenneth gathered his papers, his expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," he said. "This opportunity won't come again." But as he left, I saw him pause to watch our workshop, in action. Saw him register the energy, the purpose, the genuine transformations happening at every station. For a moment, his corporate mask slipped, revealing something like longing. That evening, as snow continued to transform the city outside, our workshop hummed with its usual energy. Timothy and Alex worked side by side, teaching Jade's students about sustainable color matching. Lauren drafted plans for expanding our community programs, while Maria prepared materials for tomorrow's public workshop. "You could have been wealthy beyond imagination," Maria said softly, joining me at the window. "Could have seen your techniques in every luxury house in Europe." I watched a student master a particularly difficult restoration technique, her face lighting up with achievement. "We already are wealthy," I replied, "just not in ways that show up on a balance sheet." Outside, the snow kept falling, each flake adding to the transformation of our industrial neighborhood. Inside, our workshop continued its own kind of transformation, of garments, of lives, of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, watching our community work together, I knew we'd made the right choice. True luxury, after all, isn't in exclusivity. It's in the power to transform, to teach, to share the beauty of possibility with others. Spring sunlight warmed Restyle Revolution's workshop as an unexpected email alert lit up my screen. Vogue magazine wanted to feature our sustainable restoration program in their annual sustainability issue. The timing seemed almost prophetic. Exactly 1 year since Alex had first walked through our door, seeking minimum wage work in a place he'd once mocked. The sound of shattering glass interrupted my thoughts. I rushed to the workshop floor to find Timothy Nash frozen in place, a broken display case at his feet. Inside lay one of Elizabeth Nash's most precious pieces, a 1954 Dior gown that had helped launch Seattle's luxury fashion scene. The delicate beadwork, which we'd spent weeks restoring, now lay scattered across our reclaimed wood floors. "I'm sorry," Timothy whispered, his face ashen. I was adjusting the lighting, trying to get better photos for our documentation. His hands shook as he knelt to gather the vintage beads, each one representing hours of painstaking restoration work. Alex moved quickly to his former boss's side, carefully assessing the damage. "It's not destroyed," he said firmly, his expertise evident as he examined the torn fabric. "Look, the original construction is still intact. The beading can be restored." Maria joined them, her trained eye already mapping out a restoration strategy. "The damage actually gives us an opportunity," she said, surprising us all. "We can document the entire restoration process, show exactly how these historical techniques work, turn this accident into education." Just then, our workshop door chimed. Elizabeth Nash entered, elegant as always, followed by a distinguished-looking man I recognized as Claude Durand, curator of the Palais Galliera Fashion Museum in Paris. They were here to evaluate the restored archive collection for a potential exhibition. Timothy looked like he might faint. "Grandmother, But Elizabeth's attention was fixed on Alex, who had already begun carefully documenting the gown's current condition, photographing the damage pattern, and cataloging each scattered bead. His movements were precise, respectful, showing none of the corporate bravado that had once defined him. "Mr. Durand," Elizabeth said calmly, "you asked about our restoration training program. You're about to see it in action." The curator moved closer, his expert eye taking in both the damage and the immediate response. "This is quite valuable." "No?" he said, noting the gown's vintage. "A significant piece." "Everything here is valuable," Alex replied, not looking up from his work. "We've learned that value isn't just in a label or a year. It's in the story, the craftsmanship, the potential for renewal." Lauren approached with our restoration documentation kit, already preparing the necessary forms. Jade and her environmental science students here for their advanced workshop gathered respectfully around the periphery, understanding they were about to witness something special. "Observe," Maria instructed, turning the accident into a teaching moment. She guided Timothy through proper damage assessment, showing him how to identify stress points in the vintage fabric. Alex demonstrated our documentation techniques, explaining how each step of the restoration would be recorded for future reference. Claude Durand watched intently as our workshop transformed into an impromptu restoration lab. "This is not what I expected," he admitted, making notes in his leather journal. "Most restoration work is done behind closed doors by experts only." "That's the old way," I explained, watching my team work. "We believe restoration knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Every person who learns these techniques becomes part of a larger movement toward sustainability." The afternoon unfolded like a masterclass in sustainable fashion restoration. Timothy, despite his initial panic, proved to be an attentive student. His corporate precision, once used to analyze profit margins, now focused on understanding the intricate patterns of vintage beadwork. Elizabeth Nash moved through the workshop, sharing stories about each piece in her collection. She paused at a workstation where one of Jade's students was learning to properly clean vintage buttons. "When I started importing fashion to Seattle," she said, "people said luxury and sustainability couldn't coexist. Now look, you're proving them wrong, one restored piece at a time." As sunset approached, Claude Durand made his decision. The Palais Galliera would be honored to feature not just these restored pieces, he announced, but the entire process of restoration. "We want to document your training program, show how sustainable fashion restoration can bridge the gap between preservation and innovation." Timothy looked up from where he was carefully sorting salvaged beads. "You mean even this?" he asked, gesturing to the damaged gown. "Even my mistake?" "Especially this," Durand replied. "It shows that true preservation isn't about keeping things perfect and untouchable. It's about understanding how to properly restore, rebuild, renew." Later that evening, after the excitement had died down, I found Alex and Timothy still at the restoration station. The damaged Dior gown lay carefully mapped out before them, each section documented, each bead categorized. Their corporate rivalry had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined a year ago, a shared dedication to preservation and sustainability. "You know," Timothy said, carefully placing another sorted bead in its designated container, "at TechVision, we would have just written this off as a loss, ordered a replacement, moved on. But here," he gestured to their meticulous restoration work, "here we learn to see the value in fixing things." Maria approached, carrying a vintage photograph she'd discovered in Elizabeth's archives. It showed the same Dior gown being worn at Seattle's first major fashion show in 1954. "Everything has a story," she said, placing the photo near their workstation. "Sometimes the repairs become part of that story, no? They show that something was worth saving." Through our workshop windows, the setting sun painted Seattle's skyline in shades of possibility. The Vogue email still waited for my response, but watching my team work, I realized we were already telling our most important story. Not through glossy magazine pages, but through transformed lives and restored treasures. Alex carefully lifted a section of the damaged beadwork, his hands sure and steady. "When I first came here," he said quietly, "I thought I was at rock bottom. Minimum wage, manual labor, everything I used to look down on." He smiled at a perfectly restored section of the gown. "I didn't understand that sometimes you have to break down completely to rebuild properly." The workshop hummed with purposeful energy as our team continued their careful restoration work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: magazine features, museum exhibitions, expanding programs. But tonight, watching Alex teach Timothy the proper way to secure vintage beading, I saw the true value of what we'd built. In refusing to limit our techniques to luxury markets, in choosing to share our knowledge freely, we'd created something more valuable than any high-end fashion house. We'd built a place where transformation wasn't just about restoring clothes. It was about restoring hope, purpose, and the belief that everything and everyone deserves a chance at renewal. Cherry blossoms drifted past Restyle Revolution's windows as I prepared for our biggest moment yet. Inside, our workshop buzzed with excitement as we readied for the inaugural Sustainable Fashion Summit. Fashion industry leaders, environmental activists, and community organizers would soon fill our expanded space, all gathered to learn about our revolutionary approach to fashion restoration. Alex stood at his workstation, now promoted to head of our training program, carefully arranging the displays that would showcase our graduates' work. Each piece told a story of transformation. From the homeless youth who now ran our community outreach program to the former fast fashion executive who'd started a sustainable design collective. "Remember when you thought this was all garbage?" Jade teased, helping him adjust a restored vintage Balenciaga that one of her environmental science students had saved from a landfill. Her own sustainable fashion program at the university had become a model for educational institutions nationwide. Timothy approached, carrying a familiar garment bag. Inside was the restored Dior gown, its beadwork now more magnificent than ever, each repaired section telling a story of resurrection. "The museum curator called," he said, his voice carrying pride rather than his old corporate arrogance. "They want this piece to be the centerpiece of their sustainable fashion exhibition." Lauren burst through the door, her legal background now perfectly merged with her passion for sustainable fashion. "The legislation passed," she announced breathlessly. "The City Council approved our proposal. Seattle will be the first city to require sustainable restoration options for all commercial fashion retailers." Maria emerged from her teaching station, where she'd been mentoring a group of Native American artisans in combining traditional crafts with sustainable fashion practices. "La Révolution de la Moda," she said softly, surveying our transformed space. "Who would have thought it would start here?" The workshop door chimed, and Kenneth Wong entered. The luminous luxury group CEO looked different somehow, humbled. "I was wrong," he said without preamble. "When I tried to buy your techniques for exclusive luxury use, I didn't understand what you were building here." Before I could respond, more guests began arriving. Elizabeth Nash, accompanied by fashion historians from 3 continents. Environmental activists who'd once protested outside our door, now proud graduates of our program. Former tech executives who'd traded stock options for sewing needles, finding purpose in preservation rather than profit. A young woman approached Alex's station, holding a damaged designer suit. "This was my mother's," she said, her voice trembling. "She wore it when she became the first female CEO in her company. But now?" She held up the jacket, showing years of neglect. Alex smiled, remembering a similar moment from his early days. "Let me show you how we can preserve not just the suit, but its story," he said, leading her to a restoration station. Timothy joined them, already documenting the garment's condition with practiced expertise. The summit officially began with an unexpected speaker. Grace Montgomery, once TechVision's ruthless legal head, now stood before our gathered crowd in a beautifully restored vintage suit. "A year ago," she began, "I thought success was measured in profit margins and market share. Then I watched two men I'd known as corporate warriors find something more valuable: the ability to create lasting, meaningful change." As she spoke, I watched Alex and Timothy work seamlessly together, teaching their young client the basics of sustainable restoration. Their corporate rivalry had transformed into something extraordinary, a partnership dedicated to proving that everything deserves a second chance. Olivia coordinated our graduate presentations, each person sharing how our program had changed their lives. A former fashion influencer spoke about starting a sustainable styling service. A retired banker demonstrated the traditional repair techniques he now taught in senior centers. Each story built upon the last, creating a tapestry of transformation. Claude Durand, who had flown in from Paris for the summit, moved through our space with obvious emotion. "This," he declared to the assembled crowd, "is the future of fashion. Not just preservation, but education. Not just restoration, but revolution." The afternoon sessions showcased our innovative techniques. Maria demonstrated how traditional craftsmanship could meet modern sustainability. Jade's students presented research on the environmental impact of our programs. Lauren explained how our model could be replicated in other cities, creating a network of sustainable fashion communities. Kenneth Wong watched it all, taking careful notes. During a break, he approached me again. "My board still wants to acquire your techniques," he admitted. "But I have a different proposal. What if, instead of buying your methods, we funded community restoration centers? Use our resources to spread your model, not restrict it." As sunset painted our workshop in golden light, Alex gathered everyone for the summit's final presentation. The damaged Dior gown, now fully restored, stood as a testament to our journey. But beside it stood something else: his first restoration project, the simple wallet he'd worked on during his earliest days with us. "When I first came here," he told the crowd, "I thought I had lost everything: my career, my reputation, my sense of purpose. What I didn't understand was that sometimes we need to lose everything to find something greater." He gestured to the gathered community of graduates, activists, artisans, and industry leaders. "This isn't just about restoring clothes. It's about restoring connections, hope, purpose." Timothy stepped forward, standing beside his former rival. "We spent years in corporate boardrooms," he added, "chasing profits at any cost. But here, we learned that true value isn't in what you take, it's in what you give back." As the summit wound down, our workshop filled with new energy. Partnerships formed between luxury brands and community programs. Environmental activists and fashion executives found common ground. Each conversation, each connection, represented another stitch in the fabric of change we were weaving. Maria found me watching it all from my office doorway. "Remember when he first came here?" she asked, nodding toward Alex as he continued teaching his client about vintage restoration. "So broken, so lost. Now look, he heals broken things, broken people." Through our windows, cherry blossoms continued their dance, nature's reminder that beauty and impermanence could coexist. Our workshop had become more than a business. It had become a movement, proving that transformation was possible not just for garments, but for people, industries, and communities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, watching Alex and Timothy work together to preserve not just clothes, but stories, watching our graduates share their knowledge with newcomers, I saw the true power of what we'd built. In choosing to share rather than hoard, to teach rather than restrict, we'd created something far more valuable than any luxury brand. We'd created hope, one restored piece at a time. 2 years to the day since Alex first walked through our door, I stood in Restyle Revolution's expanded workshop, watching the sunrise paint Seattle's skyline. Our space had grown to occupy the entire building, each floor dedicated to different aspects of sustainable fashion transformation. Yet the heart of our operation remained the same: the belief that everything and everyone deserves a second chance. The morning quiet broke as our first students arrived for the day. Among them was a familiar face, Grace Montgomery's daughter, Emily, who had left her promising law career to learn sustainable fashion restoration. She carried her mother's vintage Chanel suit, ready to begin its transformation under Alex's guidance. Alex himself had changed as much as our space. Gone was every trace of corporate arrogance, replaced by the quiet confidence of a master craftsman. He moved through the workshop with purpose, helping students discover the hidden potential in damaged garments, teaching them to see beyond surface flaws to the possibilities beneath. The workshop door chimed as Timothy Nash entered, followed by a group of international business students. His corporate rehabilitation program had become a model for ethical business practices, drawing attention from companies worldwide. "Today," he told his students, gesturing to our busy workspace, "you'll learn that true success isn't measured in profit margins, but in positive impact." Maria emerged from her advanced techniques classroom, where she'd been teaching traditional restoration methods to a group of artisans from around the world. "Victoria," she called out, excitement in her voice. "The United Nations Sustainability Committee approved our proposal. Our training program will be implemented in developing countries, creating sustainable fashion restoration centers worldwide." Lauren burst in, waving a document triumphantly. "The governor just signed it," she announced. "Our sustainable fashion education initiative will be part of every public school's curriculum in the state. We're officially changing how the next generation thinks about fashion and sustainability." Jade arrived with her environmental science students, now part of a joint program between our workshop and the university. "The latest impact report is in," she said, pulling up data on her tablet. "Our graduates have diverted over 1 million pounds of textiles from landfills this year alone. They've created 300 new sustainable fashion businesses across the country." Through the windows, I could see news vans gathering. Today marked not just our anniversary, but the launch of our global initiative. Kenneth Wong would be here soon, representing the luxury fashion conglomerate that had once tried to buy our techniques, but now partnered with us to create community restoration centers worldwide. Olivia approached, carrying a special garment bag. Inside was the first piece Alex had ever restored, that simple wallet that had marked the beginning of his transformation. Beside it lay his latest masterpiece, a restored vintage evening gown that seamlessly incorporated sustainable materials and traditional techniques. The contrast between the two pieces told the story of not just his journey, but our entire movement. The workshop filled with familiar faces as our extended community gathered for the anniversary celebration. Elizabeth Nash arrived, elegant as ever, accompanied by fashion museum curators from 3 continents. Former corporate executives who'd become sustainable fashion entrepreneurs mingled with environmental activists turned master restorers. Each person represented a thread in the complex tapestry we'd woven. "I remember mocking all of this," Alex said quietly, joining me at the window. "Calling it a waste of talent, a joke." He gestured to the busy workshop floor, where lives were being transformed alongside garments. "I never imagined becoming the lowest paid employee here would lead to finding my true calling." Timothy approached, carrying the restored Dior gown that had once symbolized his greatest mistake, but now represented our philosophy of transformation. "We spent years chasing the wrong kind of success," he reflected. "But here, we learned that true luxury isn't in exclusivity, it's in creating lasting positive change." The celebration began with a special announcement. The World Fashion Council had chosen our model of sustainable restoration and education as the new global standard. Our techniques, once mocked as idealistic and impractical, would now shape the future of fashion worldwide. Maria gathered everyone for the unveiling of our legacy project, a digital archive documenting every restoration technique we'd developed, made freely available to anyone wanting to learn. "Knowledge isn't meant to be hoarded," she declared. "Like beauty, it grows when shared." As the day progressed, stories of transformation filled our space. A former fast fashion executive demonstrated how she'd rebuilt her company using sustainable practices. A homeless teenager showed off the sustainable fashion business he'd built after graduating from our program. Each success story reinforced what we'd always believed: that transformation was possible for anyone willing to learn and grow. Kenneth Wong took the podium, humility replacing his former corporate authority. 2 years ago, I tried to buy what I thought was just a successful business model, he admitted. What I didn't understand was that Restyle Revolution isn't just a business. It's a movement. It's proof that profit and purpose can coexist, that luxury and sustainability can work together. The afternoon sun streamed through our windows as Alex led a masterclass in advanced restoration techniques. I watched him guide students through complex repairs, his patience and expertise a far cry from the broken man who had first sought minimum wage work at our door. Beside him, Timothy demonstrated sustainable sourcing practices, while Emily carefully restored her mother's suit, adding her own story to its rich history. As evening approached, Maria gathered everyone for a final presentation. On display were before and after photos of not just restored garments, but transformed lives. Alex's corporate headshot beside images of him teaching sustainable techniques. Timothy's arrest photo contrasted with him leading ethics workshops. Each image told a story of redemption, of second chances seized and lives rebuilt. "When I started this business," I told the gathered crowd, "people said it was impossible, that you couldn't build a successful enterprise on restoration and redemption, that charging luxury prices for restored fashion would never work." I gestured to our thriving community. But we proved that success isn't just about profit, it's about impact. It's about creating something that outlasts us, that continues to transform lives long after we're gone. The setting sun painted our workshop in shades of gold, highlighting the legacy we'd built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, watching Alex teach with quiet confidence, seeing Timothy share his hard-earned wisdom, observing our graduates spread the message of sustainable transformation worldwide, I knew we'd created something extraordinary. Up next, you'll find 2 more incredible stories of transformation and redemption. These tales of unexpected triumph are just a click away, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Sometimes the most powerful changes come from the most unexpected places, and these stories prove that second chances can lead to first-place victories.